The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LaFranc and Kristina Wiltsey, where wisdom meets business.
Hi, I'm Fred, and I'm the Executive.
And I'm Kristina, and I am the Mystic. And welcome to the Executive and the Mystic podcast, where wisdom meets business. I would like to introduce my co-host, Fred LaFranc, who is a absolute wonder when it comes to being able to see situations and just digest them incredibly quickly, whether they're people or companies. It is truly a wonder to be able to see and witness him as his work at Results Through Strategy as a chaos strategist. He's also an incredibly good friend that I am so lucky to be able to co-host with today.
Okay. And with that, let me introduce Kristina Wiltsey, who is a life alchemist. And the best part about that is I always say describe her because she helps you change and see perspectives of what's going on in your world in a different way. We've done episodes on this, altitude to gain, a better attitude. But today I get to interview Kristina to help you understand what does a life alchemist mean? What does she do? How did she get there? And this is not meant to be in any weird way woo-woo. It's just meant to understand that she has a capacity in her humanity that has evolved differently than some of the rest of us. And that's what gives her a wonderful perspective. And I'm really lucky to be able to share this platform with her. And now we're going to get right into the thick of things. Are you ready, Kristina?
I am, but first I want to encourage everybody to subscribe or follow wherever it is that you get your podcasts. It helps people find us. We really love it. So please do that right now. Just click whatever button you are on whatever platform you're either listening or watching this.
Fantastic. All right, Kristina, I met you as a coach, essentially, yes. And I'm not the only one. You've been able to help a lot of people just, again, gain a perspective in your life and sort of see things and reframe them in a different way. So just at a fundamental level, what's the difference between being a life alchemist and versus a traditional coach? Because you have a different, unique spin to it.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I find with the coaches that I've worked with and with coaches in general is that and this is no denigration. I should preface that. Like, everybody has their unique frameworks and platforms as everything, is that I always just found that it lacked a little bit of imagination in the sense that, in the actual literal sense of imagination, we have a tendency to think that our minds are linear or, they may be complex. We may have, mind maps. We may have different ways of storing information, but we have a tendency to believe that the voice that we hear in our heads or that the experience of thinking is the primary experience that we have, and everything is secondary to that experience. And thus a lot of coaching is like, how can you trick your mind, or how can you convince your mind to have more discipline, to get up early, to do this, to do that, and to organize things in a different way? You're basically just organizing information differently and saying, can I navigate a path through this? For me, I am a chronic overthinker. I have come from that line of being somebody who completely relied on my mind to be able to do so many different things. And it was my great awakening in my life to recognize that I am not only a better person, but I am a better thinker. And I am a better experiencer of life when I take into account not just my mind, but every single system within a body, that I am a holistic system that has a very unique operating system, just like everybody does. There are as many different unique operating systems as there are humans on Earth. There are some similarities in those systems, but in general, there are as many ways of being able to have an instruction manual for this body and its experience as there are different people. And being able to tap into your unique ability to not only think, but also be able to feel, to be able to understand decision making that doesn't just come from your mind, to be able to use your imagination, to be able to gain different perspectives. And I'm not talking about like the childish imagination, even though they're coming from the same place. I'm talking about the ability to visualize and change perspective, which I think of as more of a multidimensional process. We need to pull all of those things into our understanding of what it means to be a human. And that's how being a life alchemist is different, because I don't just want to take information that is coming from your mind. I want to take it from all over your life and recognize that there's a clear message that's coming through in your everyday life.
Okay. You know, Gary Zukav in his seminal book, The Seat of the Soul, describes a multisensory being.
Mm,
And it's the idea that we're not a human being having a spiritual experience, we're a spiritual being having a human one.
yeah.
And it taps into that. And then the idea then that this multisensory experience is combinatorial. So it's 1 + 1 = 3. You know, it amplifies in a much bigger way. And so if that's kind of what you're touching on a little bit, let's go to the beginning. You know, when did you sort of begin to discover that you had some unique qualities that maybe aren't considered normal? And how did you find out about them? Because I'll tell you, there's a great study about the human qualities. One of them is that the understanding we have three parts. You know, we have the reason, which is the intellect, the ability to think. We have emotions, it has to do with feelings and things like that. And then there's conation, which is your inherent talent. And the challenge with inherent talent is we're born that way. We don't know that until someone identifies it for us because it is who we are. Someone says, "Oh, you're really good at this." And you go, "Well, really? That's just who I am." And a lot of people confuse talent, think it's limited to playing sports and being a musician or being an artist. It's a much more than that. And you have these unique talents and abilities. So talk to me about that. Share that with us.
Absolutely. It started off with me getting in a lot of trouble as a kid, which is usually where it does start out, right? When it's conation in particular. Uh, I would have a tendency to look at somebody and talk about them in a way that they did not want me to talk about. I could naturally see people in a very different way than anything else. I could see the patterns that they were repeating. I could see uh, I could see through people. You could kind of say it that way. And I had a tendency to always deliver it in a way that really pushed their buttons, right? Because a lot of people, if they don't want to be seen, they don't want to be seen. And so, as with so many natural talents that a lot of people have, you have a tendency to then kind of condition yourself out of it or to try and smooth its rough edges as much as possible as you grow up. And also, as with anybody who has a skill when they're younger, there's a necessary maturation of that skill that comes with self-reflection and individuation that happens when we are growing up, right? Like, it's like, oh, it's all well and good for me to be able to see through people, but can I see through myself? Right. And thus started this, many, many decade process that I had of looking at myself and kind of trying to see through myself and understand the process and the contents of my own mind, the process and contents of my own body. But it wasn't until I actually went through one of those great inflection points of my life when I actually became a parent and went through childbirth, went through, the full, the full gamut of unmedicated childbirth, right? That I started to really open up to what it meant to not only use this talent on myself, towards myself, but also to be able to help other people to be able to see themselves and to have gone through kind of enough of the school of hard knocks to be able to recognize how to smooth over those rough edges and make it so that people could hear it in a way that they were willing to accept.
All right. So I'm hearing that you had sort of this X-ray vision as you looked at someone else to sort of perceive them and see them in ways that maybe they were unaware of themselves. But for you, it's very clear. And as part of your evolution, you say, well, let me turn this inner vision toward myself to make sure that I'm using the same skill to see where I'm at and mature from there to be able to help others from that regard. It sounds a lot like intuition. Is this a higher form of intuition, just to give it a name so that people can sort of understand that they might possibly have some of this, but not as developed as yours?
Absolutely. I would say that we lack language to describe the subtle fields of energy that surround and move through us all. We have colloquial language. We have like slang language for this kind of stuff. Like, oh, I have a gut instinct, or women's intuition, or I just had a feeling, or I just kind of know, or, there's a lot of language that's kind of coming into our lexicon at this point, like empath, or any number of different things when it comes to that. But I would say that all of those things are working towards trying to describe this invisible layer of reality that shows an interconnection between things, right? It's very similar to, you know, if you ever held two magnets together, you can feel the force that's pulling them together. You know it's there because you're physically feeling that force, but you can't see the magnetic fields, right? Birds can see magnetic fields, as an example, right? They have an ability to actually see EM currents in the air, but we as humans don't have that ability yet, right? Or some of us haven't developed that ability, is the way that we can see it. So the way that I see it is that I've just kind of become a bit of a bird, right? When it comes to being able to develop a sense of feeling, not just in my gut, right? So not just having a feeling of, oh, I should go into this situation, or oh, I shouldn't, which is a very kind of survival ego based, but very, very important form of intuition that everybody should listen to, but also an ability to sense those waves and fields that are existing just outside of us and in relation to other people. So that's very similar to walking into a room and being able to sense all the undercurrents and all the politics that are going on in that room. Some people will call that being an empath. I call it being more of an energy path, in the sense that I'm not necessarily feeling the emotions, but I am tactily almost feeling what's going on in that room at any given time.
Well, I mean, humans basically, we have five senses, and that's how we perceive the physical world.
Yes.
Every sense we have is a receptor of vibration and frequency. The one that's most developed, the highest frequency, is your eyes, because we're seeing the speed of light, right? So it's light that comes into our through our eyeballs in our brain. I guess my understanding scientifically is sort of inverted, and then we translate that into whatever we think we see, or then we hear, or we taste, or we feel, and so forth and so on. All these are the five senses, but what you're describing seems to be sort of another level of senses that is sort of in the bandwidth that you don't have the dimension. You know, we know that cats and dogs can see a light spectrum that we can't see. You mentioned the birds as an example, right? So the light spectrum's huge, and we have a tiny little glimpse of it. There's a lot to be seen there. Same thing happens with sound. We can only hear within certain. Some people have a really refined sense of hearing.
Yes.
So they can go beyond the norm, just like someone can sing 5 octaves, and other people like me can't sing at all. So it's a different thing. So we have physical senses, and then we have, what would you call them? Spiritual senses, or just at different energies? How would you describe that added dimension?
I would say that added dimension is it's an increased level of sensitivity for the subtle. So it's kind of like subtle senses is kind of what I would call it, right? And every single one of our senses has higher levels, if we want to say higher, more sensitive levels of subtlety and attunement to subtlety, including our minds. So when you talk about the experience of the mind and the thoughts, you can even have, we don't really think of the mind as a sense, but it very much so is, right? It is, not only is it taking in all the information from all of the physical sense places, it's also taking in information from its own subconscious, right? The ability and access that we have to the subconscious, it's taking information from that, and it's creating the filters through which we see so many different things. So in its own way, it is a sense, right? It is sensing our history. And that is one level of the mind, but the mind is also capable of developing subtlety to be able to take in information that goes into different spaces. So if you've ever met a yogi or a channel or somebody who's pulling in information and wisdom that feels very right in your body, and you're just like, where is this even coming from? Right. That is an attunement of the mind to a subtler sense. This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
All right, well, you call yourself a life alchemist, so let's just spend a little bit of time on that before we go on. The concept of alchemy, at least historically, was turning lead into gold. But as we discussed, that was really an allegory. It was not meant to be taken literally. It was a reflection of really the evolution of a man or a woman, of a human, from a sort of a low frequency, sort of unaware being to a higher level of self awareness and greater awareness about different qualities that they have. That's the lead to gold. Is that your
Yes.
understanding?
That is absolutely the way that I see things. Ram Dass says we're all waking up. And the way that I like to think of it is that we're constantly expanding and integrating as we grow, right? So we have a physical body that grows from a small being to a large being. And we also have a spiritual sense or a soul that is growing from a small being that senses itself in a small way to a larger being, a recognition of a larger being. Ultimately, we are in that process of refining. And this is, I come from a background in chemistry. So for me, this is, there's a lot of propositional density in my own life. There's a lot of like, oh yeah, there's a lot of different meanings about this. But the understanding of lead into gold is, how is it that you go from a being who feels that it is suffering and it is small and it is powerless to one that believes that and understands and knows that it is so much more than that, right? And how are you integrating that not just into your thoughts but into your whole being, so that all your and all the cascading effects that happen because of that, because your behavior changes and your sense of self behavior changes and your ability to love changes and your relationships change and everything cascades out in the world when you start to undergo this inner transmutation of lead to
Right.
gold.
Yeah, and you become a multisensory being in that
Yes.
regard.
Yes.
The great expression says that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience; we're spiritual beings having a human one. And there's the discovery of that fact, the realization of that fact that changes your perspective. So let's
Yes.
move then into how do you apply this when you work with people? Because all of us are sort of victims of ourselves, right?
Yes.
We make ill-informed decisions. We don't see things clearly. We get defensive. We have barriers. We have obstacles. We have blind sides, and we're doing the best we can. So it's not a judgment. How do you apply this perspective then to work with someone who, when you meet them and you see them, you go, "Oh boy, I see we're starting at sort of this point here, not up here, down
Mhm.
here, and now I got to help them rise up." What do you walk us through that?
Absolutely. So I'll give an example of someone who I've been working with recently, as someone who recently underwent a period of grief in their life, right? And they are struggling to manage their emotional reactions, right? It's a kind of a very common thing that we can all say is like, oh, all of a sudden my cup is too filled because I had this massive event just dump a huge bucket of water on my system, and
Right,
I don't know how to move through it because I don't know how to regulate the stuff that I normally swallow or regulate. We kind of think of it as regulate, but
right,
probably typically we usually suppress, but we have no room left. There's no room left in that closet to be able to suppress anything. And so now we have to express it. And so what I would say when I look at that person is I say, okay, I know that there's a blueprint of what it means to be an emotionally intelligent and a spiritually intelligent being and what it means to have balance. And right now, what I can see is that this person's emotional bucket is totally filled and they don't have a clear mechanism for clearing that system out. Right. And if I recognize that each of us individuals is going to be operating in a very different way, we have very different doors and access points to this. My work would be to be like, okay, how do we clear out and how do we help you develop the tools to clear out this emotional state and on a regular basis, and also recognize that you're much bigger, which will expand that bucket a lot more so it can handle a lot more, right? So it's like if you think of our emotional bodies as a bathtub, there are two mechanisms. You can clear the drain or you can stop the water running, right? Ultimately, stopping the water running is a hard thing to do. So okay, if I can't stop the water running, I'm going to make a bigger bathtub, right? So I'm either going to make a bigger bathtub and
yeah,
I'm going to make sure it's clearing, right? Because
yeah,
life is the water running, right? There's nothing that you can do for that. So for somebody who comes to me and they're needing that experience, we're going to look at it from, I oftentimes think of it as a, masculine and feminine has a lot of connotation towards male and female genders, which I really is a traditional way of describing it, but it's something that I'm always a bit wary of because I don't want people to say, okay, well, I'm a man, so I can't have the feminine aspects. We just have a lot of that binary thinking at
Yeah,
this
it's
point.
not it's energy, it's not gender. You're right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
difference of it.
And so I think of it as instead that there's a structure force and there is a abundance force. One is fluid, one is structure based, right? And so if someone comes to me with this, I'm overwhelmed by this transition and I feel like I can't handle it and I feel like my anxiety is super high and I'm blowing up at people all the time, I say, okay, what are the two things that we can do? How do we get the abundance flowing through your life? And
Hmm.
how do we fundamentally change the structure to be bigger, to be able to handle these emotional experiences?
Yeah, your metaphor of a bathtub is either the water's flowing in, the emotions coming in, and the you got to sort of open up the drain, let it flush out. It would seem to me that if you're trying to stop the water running, that's the suppression,
Mhm.
and that it's a failed strategy because you can't. It's too powerful, and I know that emotions are experienced through the body. So when people go through trauma, that they really have a hard time accepting the pain of it. They sort of hold the feeling in their bodies in the attempt not to experience it. But all that does is create illness and disease because the body suffers as a result of that energy that's just locked in there. And sadly, with a lot of fear attached to it, a lot of pain attached to it. And so I know when I've talked to people who can sort of open their hearts and release it and experience it, and it's very powerful. You got to go through all the not
Yeah.
the agony of it, the expression of emotion. Humans, when we feel things, we leak at times, right? And we call that
Mm.
tears. And then
Yep.
tears have at different levels. It could be little soft sobbing, or it could just be racking sobs that it just flush through your whole body. And I've experienced that when this emotion is just finally released. But that release is therapeutic. By getting rid of it and expressing it, you've done two things. You've embodied it while simultaneously you're letting it go,
Yes.
because you said, and embody means that I'm going to let it go through my body and feel that, and it's a very, very healthy thing to do. And when you're
Yeah.
working with uh, one of your clients, and you help them go through this and recognize that the sensory experience at a low level can be very painful, but when you release it, you go to a higher level, higher frequency. What
Yeah.
is that process you take them through?
So the process is, opening the drain makes it so that suddenly you have a whole bunch more energy going through your body because naturally the systems are all connected, right? It's more sophisticated than the bathtub, right? Like, it's very similar to the adage about money, which is money, the more money that you let flow out, the more money will flow into your life, right? Especially if you don't resent the money that's leaving. If you treat the money that's leaving with gratitude, the money that comes in with gratitude, you're just this gratitude money train and the system starts to flow in a wonderful way. It's a very similar system with the energy that happens within within our bodies, right? Is that the more that we allow release of the emotion, the more that we accept and love the systems that we have, the more that we open the heart, which opens out all those channels, including the eyes for tears, right?
Right.
It's like we open up the system and we start to love the contents of the bathtub despite the fact that they're here, and all of a sudden again that releases this experience. So it's a funny thing in the recognition of I once had a monk say to me, and I think I've said this before, is that like the greatest abstraction or the greatest skill that you can develop is to develop the ability to relax, which is another way of saying surrender. So that is the process of relaxation on all levels of the being, right? And the mind and the heart, and the emotional center, all those different things allows this release of energy. And so because of that, more energy comes into the system, more information comes into the system. That's a key aspect of this, is to get that emotional field, that abundance flow going. The second is recognizing that in the process of doing this, you need to also open up your mind to be more willing to believe yourself. This is a fundamental thing that I like to teach, which is this understanding of if you want to develop your intuition, you have to pay attention to what is going on inside of you because all the time, all the time. Things are happening inside of your life in the outside world, and things are happening because you're a magnet. So you're attracting all the things that
Sure.
are going to be a reflection of your inner state. And if you don't pay attention to what is going on and the messages that are continually being brought to you, or if you don't believe them, or if you're outsourcing your wisdom to something else, then you're not going to be able to expand the structure. You have to recognize that you are incredibly intelligent to your own system, and you have to pay attention and actually respect things that are happening inside of you in order to be able to develop that form of intuition. I use dreams as an example. Everyone's like, oh, that's just, I was used to call it detritus of the mind. It's just, oh, we just got to process what's ever going on. For people who can dream and who can remember their dreams, they are being given a huge piece of information as to how their system is operating. And if they pay attention to it, and if they treat it with just a little bit of seriousness, to be like, oh, this is a message. I just received a piece of mail. I'm going to read it, and I'm not going to just discard it. That's an important aspect of this.
So you're talking a lot about self awareness, which is sort of the
Mhm.
foundational piece of emotional intelligence, and you already mentioned that earlier. And you also mentioned spiritual intelligence. What's the difference between the two?
Yes. So I would say that emotional intelligence is what brings you through your day to day being with a regulated and kind of it's very interrelational and intra-relational. If we see emotion as this actual it's the for those who understand the process of the brain, there's the right and the left brain, and then there's the
Right.
corpus callosum, which is like the thing that connects the brain. It's kind of that in that space is emotion, because there's a feeling and a sensation associated with energy in the going through the body, and then there is the perception of that sensation and the labeling of it, right?
Okay.
So big heat in my chest, I am angry, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the
Right.
process in which we
Okay.
feel the energy, and then we have the thought that is associated with it. That is emotional intelligence at its heart, which is recognizing that your body is constantly reacting to the sensations that are arising in it, and then it's constantly labeling those things, and then it is behaving as a result of that labeling, right? And that this is not just a system going through your body, it's going through everybody else's bodies too. When I said that, that thought process is bringing up the history of your life. It's like, yep, I'm going to label this thing and I'm going to react accordingly to how I've either always reacted, or somebody taught me how to react, or, how my father reacted or how my mother reacted. You know, I'm going to bring up all those sensations. And so if I recognize that I can stop that system, or I can kind of intercede in that before the thought runs away with a behavior that is not good for anybody, I can observe it, or I can intercede, even better, right? And that you are in a constant relationship with other people, and it's really kind of a smaller circle inside what I would consider spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence is, to me, the way that I describe it is that it is a understanding of the meta patterns, metacognition, the kind of why are we here, why is this happening on a greater level. There's a lot of why involved in spiritual intelligence, but there's a lot of understanding of the interconnectedness of not just you and another person, but you and your environment, you and your history. It's very multidimensional in that it's like it's time related, it's space related, it's people related, and it's being able to see those connections and kind of saying, why is this the way that this is? Why is it that my life seems to keep bringing up over and over again this pattern of I'm abandoned, right? Why do I keep seeing this over and over and over again, and trying to associate meaning with that?
Right. And that I think the essence was that, as we discussed earlier, you and I, that spiritual intelligence operates at a different level than emotional
Hmm.
intelligence, and it is
Yes.
about the difference, the relation between yourself and meaning. The
Hmm.
why, not just the how. The emotional intelligence is the how. I'm experiencing these sensations. What's going on here? Versus like, why is this happening at a higher dimension? To see the patterns, because I think
Yes.
spiritual intelligence sees patterns at a higher level that you cannot see when you're just reacting within yourself internally. We know that emotionally intelligent people can self-regulate. They can make choices instead of just reacting. They have social awareness. They have relationship management. But the spiritual energy seems to be or that spiritual intelligence seems to be what you have developed as your natural talent, or you found it as a talent and then developed it further.
Yeah.
And how does this apply to again, back to the client? Here's a client that's working with,
Mm-hmm.
you're helping them understand that they're multidimensional, they're multisensory. You're helping them see patterns as opposed to just reactions and, like, woe is me. We talked about in an earlier podcast, the victim versus the victor. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of this, how you go through that transition. But how does this all add up to someone, experiencing themselves in a different way, so they can move forward instead of just being trapped in the past because of the things that were there before? I let the emotion go out because I'm no longer repressing it. I'm letting the water flow. The drain's open. Things are flowing through me in a positive way. What's
Mm-hmm.
next?
So I think what next is how I kind of work with people on a regular basis. So people come to me, and they come to me every week. They come to me twice a month. They're working with me in a practicum, which is 12 sessions together. One of the key things that we do in every single session is we talk about what came up in the past week or the past 2 weeks that you want to talk about, because this is the practice that I have to help develop people in their ability to see and understand the patterns that are happening, right? I have people comment, they say that I must have hired actors. That's my favorite. That's my favorite.
Okay.
Because it's like, oh, guess what? We're going to talk about, or we have a goal to be able to understand why people continually betray you. Right. That's a pretty common one that we have, especially with executives, right? Because that is executives sit in a story of resources, and how do you gain resources? There's a lot of that going around in it, and betrayal wound sits right in that spot, right? And this is part of that spiritual intelligence that I'm only just like dipping everyone's toes in for just a minute to say, like, these things are all interconnected and we can see it. And the more we get into it, the more we see it. Is that, okay, so you have this pattern of betrayal that's coming up over and over again. And then they talk to me for 15 minutes, right? And we talk about what came up. And the fascinating thing is that they're going to bring up the things that they didn't even know were important, right? That always happens, right? Is like, oh, I had this weird experience, or I ran into this person, or I did this and I did that. And I'm like, okay. And so then we take all of that information plus everything that we know, and the things that kind of the assignment, the homework, so to speak, that we had to be able to look at betrayal in your life or something, seeing that it's popping up again. People, you will always have synchronicities, like people will show up in your life, or you'll see a person at the coffee shop who looks like your boyfriend who betrayed you in the past, things along those lines. And this is one of those things that, if you don't believe me, then, I mean, for one thing, I'm really sorry, because the magic is there. It's absolutely there. You can attest to this, right, Fred? It just
Yeah.
works in that way, right? Um, and so we look and we try, and I work to help people develop to see those patterns that are happening inside their life, right? And then what we do is we inevitably see the pattern as it's showing up in their everyday life. And then we usually will go to some sort of what I would call the shamanic field, which is the imaginary field, right? Which we don't, that's one of those, it's a playground that is so incredibly powerful that we completely underestimate or thinks is a child's tool, but it is not in any way, shape, or form. We've developed, perhaps a mind map is a great example of using imagination to organize information, right? It's like, and everyone's like, oh, well, this is a great skill that you can develop. But what we start to recognize is that that is using the imaginary field to help increase your cognitive ability, right? You can use the imaginary field not just to increase your cognitive ability, but to increase your pattern recognition, which is that more spiritual intelligence, to be able to see yourself in a situation, right? To be able to gain perspective, to develop emotional intelligence, and even IQ, to be able to see how to maybe, work out a problem or do basic problem solving, which is what I would say is very much so a function of cognitive, but it's a tool of that kind of mental body. The imaginary field, when you develop that, you are capable of unlocking all, not just the sensitivity for the subtle, but the ability to map it visually or tactily, or any of the ways that your brain is most attuned to be able to understand, and to be able to bring in all that information from the whole body to be able to have totally different perspective on everything. The more information that you pull in, the more that you develop this imaginary field, the more that you are able to take in more complex information, do better pattern handling, all of this. And so we do this through guided meditations is one of the key like kind of ways of developing the imaginary field. I always say, this is my basic test, which is if you can you imagine right now a faucet in your mind? Can you see a faucet, Fred?
Oh yeah.
Yep. I know you can. It will be like this. And can you see that faucet running?
Yes.
Can you turn off that faucet?
Yes.
Can you change the color and style of that faucet to something you've never seen before?
Yes.
All right. Tell me what your faucet looks like.
I visualized an old-fashioned faucet with the porcelain handles, but in different colors. Each of the knobs had a different color on it. So,
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Right. So when I was younger, I had this very interesting experience where I would, being a millennial and being on the cusp of, we didn't have tablets, we had nothing along those lines. What was our entertainment when we were on long car trips? Looking out the window, right? I used to pretend cut down trees all through like every single tree I passed. It was like this almost like a tick that I had to like do. And it was such a fascinating moment for me because I could imagine it cutting it down. And then all of a sudden it would pop back up because it hadn't actually been cut down, right? It was some sort of interface between the imagination
yeah.
and reality.
Yeah. Your mind's eye and the inside and the external world.
Exactly, exactly. And if we recognize that so much of energy healing comes in that spot, which we won't even really tap into, but so much of this imaginary space exists in that interface between reality and what you see it as. And so whenever you hear of Olympic athletes who visualize something happening, visualize winning a race or visualize something along those lines, they're playing on that interface place between reality and what the mind wants to project onto reality. And they are trying to effectively affect reality in that way. And so the more that we develop this imaginary field, the more we're capable of doing that.
Yeah, no, as you're describing it, when I've worked with people, because, in my consulting work, I work with founders and CEOs all the time and board of directors, strong personalities, right? None of these people are shy. But what I have found is resistance at times to certain things. You get the person who they think they're the smartest person in the room. That's a real typical, real ego driven. And I sort of said that these are the people who live from their neck up. They're skeptical about everything except their own self importance. And in working with people on a direct basis, and in working with you, because what you describe, you get very excited describing this awakening.
Yes.
Having gone through it, I can attest personally that it's magnificent. Is that you now are able to have heart and mind coherence. You
Mm-hmm.
open up your heart. You're able to now experience greater sense of empathy and understanding of other people, especially in a mentor relationship. Because I think the number one priority for all leaders is to develop the people that work for them. That's the
Yes.
number one responsibility because it makes the business better, it makes the individual better, it makes you better. And then the last one is we talked about this intuition in your gut, which is kind of it's like when you walk in. There's a thing that says that men and women experience safety differently. Men go up into parking lots all the time without concern. Women are like, oh shit, am I safe? Right? There's a different experience of that. And so the heart, mind, and gut play into this. And when I've worked with people and I've worked for myself to sort of tap into each one to say, what do I think? What do I feel? And what's the sensation I have here? Is this safe or not? I come up with a very different answer to a problem than the way I would do it if it was just trying to do it logically. So where do you find people in terms of resisting this? Because if the experience of it's amazing, but you're trying to get them to experience something that they may be afraid of. So what is it that blocks the ability to just say, okay, I'm in?
Yeah, this is a fascinating one, right? Because one of the things that I do is I work with what I call the inner villains, which
Mm-hmm.
correlate very much so to human design and the Enneagram, right? There's 9 Enneagrams, there's 9 centers in human design. And the reason I bring it up is because usually when I talk to somebody, I can kind of immediately understand what story they're in. The story is I'm someone who is very intellectual, who is very disconnected from my emotional place. They sit in the story of what it means to be integrated, right? Because so much of their story is about how do I integrate my work life and how do I stop compartmentalizing everything in my life so that I can't even show up when I show up at home with my, partner and my kids. Oh, I can actually show up with them and I'm not just like emotionally completely out of it because I can't do this flip flop between the work and being one persona at work and being one persona at home. And so that helps me a lot with understanding where people's resistance is coming in because it is very unique to a lot of people. Some people experience resistance because they refuse to see themselves as anything but the victim, right? We've talked about this with Victim Victor Vessel. And I will occasionally get people like that. And it is a process, a very, very gentle process of recognizing that they're so kind of embroiled in the drama triangle that we need to really separate the persecutor from the rescuer from the victim and to help them gain perspective very, very gently for self-reflection, right? Like, what does it mean to be able to self-reflect? And so their resistance is coming from the fact that they've probably been in this victim mindset their whole lives, and it has made it so that they can cope, right? That they can cope with all the trauma that they experienced as a young person. They're able to cope with it in a very different way if we're able to gently say, you keep seeing this thing where you keep becoming the bad guy and then you feel like a victim because you keep being the bad guy. So let's look at that. So that's one example of a piece of resistance. Another example is one, I mean, that we've talked about on the podcast before, Fred, when you did your Cancer, COVID, and croissants, that was such a huge piece of revealing your private life, that your resistance sat in that space. And it wasn't that it was something that needed to be overcome. It was just something that needed to be explored, right? To be like, am I willing to show what I would perceive as a weakness when I have done so much in my life to be able to overcome so many things? Do I really want to show that weakness?
Right.
Right. And so that resistance comes. And so you can call that ego. You can call that, you can call that whatever you want. But the idea is that resistance comes in very specific packages for very different people. It is an absolute requirement of being a human to experience resistance, right? That's why we're here. It's like, it's how we can kind of operate
Right.
in a
Yeah,
human
it's almost
body.
a survival instinct is almost, be cautious of it. But, when you describe that to me as a weakness, I think that intellectually one could see it as a weakness. And at a higher dimension, it's just a state that you've been in. It's not even a weakness. You're
Mhm.
not judging it. You're not
It's
labeling it.
not.
Yeah, it's a different thing. And as I learned, the paradox was I gained control by letting go of control. Like
Hmm.
the control I was having at one level was greater control at a higher level of the things that were taking place here. And that's part of what it is. So the idea is sort of like you finally get it. You kind of come to that realization you described earlier. You finally have the coherence between your head, your heart, your gut. And it's like now your whole humanity is awakened and it's in
Hmm.
play. And that's what you're able to interface in terms of your business or your personal life. That makes it different. There's no doubt that the resistance just reinforces the thing that is hurting you.
Yes.
The great expression that says pain's inevitable, but suffering's optional. And you help people get rid of the suffering and then experience the pain in a way that the lesson can be learned. It's nothing to be avoided because you have to experience it fully in order to let it go. Otherwise, you're hanging on to it, and we pay the price for that. That's sadly what it is. I know when I was talking to someone who was very embittered about an action someone took against them, and I learned this a long time. I didn't come up with it instead. And this bitterness is like you drinking poison, things going to hurt the other person. Like that doesn't make sense, but that's exactly what it is. We make those choices all the time, and as leaders, that's a big part of it. Um, and you mentioned that you're doing some inner villain work, which is the model you've created to help people understand things. We're going to spend more time on this in a future episode, and go there. But in closing, what statement would you give to whoever's listening to this in terms of how they might take steps in this direction? Not necessarily to work with you. That's great if they work with you, but even for their
Hmm.
own self-discovery, what would that be?
I think one of the things that I would say is that when you embark on this, having a support system, whatever that looks like, is a really, really wonderful thing to have, right? It's like there's so many things I could say that says, follow your excitement or, do what feels right, but everybody's system's unique. So there isn't really general advice I can say to say like, this is what your decision making is going to look like. But what I will say is that the more that you can find allies and people who are of a similar mindset of wanting to understand and self-reflect on themselves, the better. And the thing that is inevitably going to happen is the more that you move into this area of saying, well, I maybe want to explore this, the more that you're going to find the people who are going to be the community who's going to support you, right? That's the kind of the thing. That's the hired actors thing. Like, oh yeah, how's this happening? Like I'm making a move and suddenly the universe is coming. Sometimes that requires letting go of the people who are more closed-minded, the people who are in, as we always say that, what are the 5 different people that are sitting around you? Right. Are they people who are in a growth mindset? Or are they people who are wanting to just, talk down about other people and make themselves feel bigger? Right? Or are they people who are constantly talking about their victim mindset? Or are they people, it's like, be very mindful of who are the people who are in that innermost circle and recognize that if you want to become a growth mindset person, you need to put at least one growth mindset person in that circle.
Right.
At least that.
No, that's great advice. The people you surround yourself with, and they always say that it's like a tea bag. You absorb all the energy of the people around you. So make sure the people that are pushing you up, they're not pulling you down.
Yes.
I think the closing scene in Good Will Hunting, when Ben Affleck tells his friend Matt Damon, if you don't get out of here, I'll kill you myself because you have so much potential, greater than mine, but I love you. So go be the great person you can be. That's a true friend. That's a true gift.
Yes.
And fortunately, I can say that about you. That's what you're like.
I can say the same back to you, Fred.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hopefully everyone listening or watching has enjoyed this. We're going to get more into this. This is a very deep topic, but you now have a little bit of an insight in terms of the gifts that Kristina has and why the people that work with her are really fortunate because she touches them in a very special way. So Kristina, thank you so much for sharing of yourself today and look forward to the next episode.
Thank you so much, Fred. Take care, y'all.
The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LaFranc and Kristina Wiltsey, where wisdom meets business.